When you think of the X-Men, the first character that comes to mind might be different for a lot of people. Could be Wolverine, could be Storm, could be Nightcrawler, it probably depends on your favorite. But let's take a small step back and look at the bigger picture. When you think of the X-Men as a unit, a squad, a team, who's the first to come to mind then? I don't know about anybody else, but when I think of that specific context, there's only one person that comes to mind. Longtime field leader of countless teams of mutants, Scott Summers, the mutant known as Cyclops. One of the original 5 mutants recruited by mutant telepath Charles Xavier, Cyclops has been with the X-Men from the very beginning. The son of Christopher and Catherine Summers, Scott and his brother Alex, who would grow up to be the mutant Havoc, were orphaned at a young age after a plane crash seemingly killed their parents. Though the brothers were safely sent away by parachutes, it caught fire as they were descending, resulting in Scott manifesting his optic blast for the first time, using them to slow he and his brother's fall. Scott hit his head upon landing, giving him minor brain damage. This ended up injuring the part of his brain that would have dictated his control over his optic blast, leading to him never 100% quite being able to keep them in check, at least without outside assistance. The two were sent to an orphanage that was secretly a front for the evil geneticist, Mr. Sinister, who had Alex adopted to separate the two brothers in order to bring out Scott's potential as a mutant. After escaping Sinister's clutches, he was taken in by Charles Xavier, who had recently established the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. Together with Jean, alias Marvel Girl, Warren Worthington, alias Angel, Hank McCoy, alias Beast, and Bobby Drake, alias Iceman, Scott was a part of the original 5 members of the first ever team of X-Men. Being one of the longest tenured residents of Xavier's school, Cyclops gradually grew into the role of field team leader of the X-Men, despite his more reserved personality and self-esteem issues. In spite of the aforementioned personal issues, Cyclops is one of the most reliable people you can have behind you in a battle, and a seasoned battle tactician at that. Ask any longtime Marvel reader who the best leader in Marvel is, and they'll probably either say Cyclops or Captain America. Though he still lacks total and complete control over his powers, he has an uncanny sense of spatial awareness that allows him to calculate where his beams will hit and how they'll bound off objects almost instantly. It's impossible to talk about Cyclops without talking about his longtime love interest, Jean Grey. Much of his life experience is intertwined with hers, from growing up in Xavier's school, to Jean becoming the Phoenix, to marrying Jean's clone, to, well, just about everything regarding Cable, or his alternate timeline son Nate Grey. X-Men stories get pretty wild, y'all. Don't even get me started on that family tree. Of particular note for Cyclops was the time period after M-Day, the day Scarlet Witch decimated the vast majority of the world's mutant population. Now the figurehead of a nearly extinct species, Scott stepped up to provide a safe haven for what few mutants remained in the world, the nation of Utopia. This era saw Cyclops at his absolute most pragmatic, taking something of a middle ground approach compared to the ideals of Charles Xavier, and the more militant abrasive approach to protect the mutant kind of Magneto, the latter of which was impressed enough with Scott's work that he flat out joined his side. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but Cyclops is one of my favorite comic book characters ever. He was the first X-Men character I'd ever seen, since my older sister had a copy of the Sega Genesis X-Men game where he was on the cover, and as a young child still in Pampers, I'd always sit and watch her play it. Thankfully for me, Cyclops is one of the main playable characters in Capcom's first Marvel fighting game outing, X-Men Children of the Atom. His voice in Capcom's fighters was provided by the late, great Norm Spencer, who also notably provided his voice in X-Men the Animated Series. Cyclops has some of the most memorable voice clips in fighting games, let alone the Versus games. I can't even hear the word behold without thinking about Cyclops. His design in the Versus games is styled after the iconic Jim Lee design from the early 90s, that went on to become the de facto design for him for most of that decade. Look, if I go on any longer, this will just turn into incomprehensible rambling about how cool Cyc is. So, without further ado, Cyclops is, as you'd expect, a character with some effective projectiles. His biggest strength, however, is just how well-rounded he is. Cyclops can get in your face as easily as he can keep you away from him, thanks to some pretty great normals. He has a double jump, which can allow him to not only camp up high and build meter with optic blast, but more importantly, he can chase down other characters employing the same strategy, particularly flight-capable characters like Storm. Cyclops can perform a double kick by pressing heavy kick twice. The second one will pop the opponent up into the air, allowing for air combo follow-ups. Cyclops can notably cancel his standing heavy kick into a crouch, then quickly perform another standing heavy kick, allowing him to chain them multiple times, assuming you don't mess up the inputs. He can also alter his jumping heavy punch and kick by holding down when doing them. Speaking of heavy punches, Cyclops has an especially unique one, Optic Bullet. This is a single projectile that Cyclops can fire off while either standing or crouching. The neat thing about this is that it's special cancelable, so you can throw out a special behind it to pressure your opponent. Speaking of specials, his first one is his most obvious, Optic Blast, done with a quarter circle forward and punch. Cyclops has 3 variations of this depending on the punch button pressed. The light version is a low crouching variant. The medium version is a standing version. And the heavy version goes upwards at a 45-degree angle. It's an okay option to snipe a predicted jump, though he does get more from hitting them with an air-to-air normal instead. Gene Splice is Psych's anti-air, done with a Dragon Punch motion and punch. This is a multi-hit uppercut that ends with an upwards optic bullet. Mashing the punch button increases the number of hits and damage of this move significantly. Rapid Punch is done by pressing forward twice, followed by Light Punch and Light Kick at the same time. This initiates an advancing series of punches and kicks that can be extended by mashing either punch or kick, ending with an optic bullet. This does a pretty decent amount of damage, though it might be tricky to find openings to use this. Pressing forward, and heavy punch and heavy kick initiates Neckbreaker Drop. Cyclops briefly takes up a running stance before charging forward, and if he connects with the opponent, does a leaping throw. Keep in mind that this will absolutely whiff if he does this full screen. It's a pretty risky move to throw out in general though. Cyclops' first super is Mega Optic Blast. This is a large multi-hitting beam attack that does decent damage, but has a good deal of recovery. It's not bad to throw out if you know it'll guarantee a chip kill, but otherwise, this is best used if comboed into with a juggle combo. Cyclops' second super is Super Optic Blast. This is a smaller multi-hitting beam, but the catch is that it's omnidirectional, letting you control the direction you fire it in, and if it hits the ground, it'll actually bounce off of it at an angle, which can be used to catch your opponent off guard. Notably, this can also be done in the air, where it has less recovery, making it the more ideal use of Cyclops' meter. Cyclops' stage in this game is the Danger Room. The Danger Room itself was constructed to serve as a combat training room for the X-Men, being upgraded various times over the years, usually after incidents that saw the X-Mansion destroyed. As it would turn out, the Danger Room AI at some point would actually grow sentient, reaching out to Professor Xavier and questioning their existence. Xavier, jerk that he is, elected to ignore them, causing the AI to grow bitter and hateful towards Xavier. Understandably so, honestly. At one point, after being upgraded again, the AI, taking the name Danger, started taking over other machines in hopes of finding a body. While she was bound to her prime directive of never killing the X-Men, she had no such qualms in attempting to kill Xavier, though she'd be talked down from it in a few cases, notably by Emma Frost. In Children of the Atom, the Danger Room has 4 distinct locales that it'll switch between at random. The standard Danger Room setting, an underwater setting, a tropical setting, and a space setting. The neat thing about this stage is how it reacts to actions like your character dashing, backdashing, or jumping. So, for example, in the standard and tropical locations, jumping will usually result in either a sharp spike or vine protruding from under the player's jump, just barely missing them. It's not an actual stage hazard or anything, and it isn't capable of damaging the player, but it's really cool that the designers added these reactive touches to emphasize the danger in, well, the Danger Room. In the standard room, forward dashing has a giant press come down, just narrowly avoiding crushing the player. And backdashing has several lasers appear and shoot at the spot that the character backdashed from. In the space room, in addition to the lasers, several meteorites rain down occasionally, just narrowly missing the fighters. In the tropics room, there's mainly only the vines that pop up whenever you jump, but there is some wildlife in the background, like a squirrel, a parrot, and even a bird that flies by if you super jump high enough. My personal favorite, though, is the underwater room. There's less in the way of overt background hazards here, but you see various sea life swimming across the stage, like some fish and even a stingray. There's all manners of reefs adorning the background, and if you super jump high enough, you can even see a sunken ship with rays of light from the water surface beaming down on it. In every variation, the control room window is visible, with Professor X observing the combatants through the window. This is an element that would actually be carried over into the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 reinterpretation of the stage as well. Cyclops' theme is an upbeat guitar-led banger composed by Hideki Okugawa, best known for being the lead composer of the Street Fighter 3 games. I already talked about him in Frank's video, so I won't dwell too long here, but I love that opening riff of the song like you wouldn't believe. I think the track itself manages to fit the stage pretty well, which is kind of an accomplishment, given that the stage switches visual themes more than once, but the composition still seems to fit without any kind of major tempo changes. That's talent. It also bears mentioning that if you're good enough to face Akuma in Children of the Atom, his home stage is also the Danger Room. Considering that Akuma overrides the fight that takes place before the last two bosses of the game, I've always liked to believe that in Children of the Atom, Akuma was like, I don't know, a Danger Room simulation meant to test the X-Men's prowess before they go off to fight Juggernaut and Magneto. That's just my dumb little headcanon anyway. Here are Cyclops' colors. And here's his ending. Naturally, Cyclops headlines the X-Men side of the roster with X-Men vs. Street Fighter, forming half of what's honestly one of the most iconic fighting game title screens of all time. As far as how he plays, he's largely similar to his Children of the Atom incarnation and doesn't really lose anything. He gets two new moves though. First is Optic Sweep, done with a half circle back and punch. This is a low-hitting optic blast meant to trip up standing opponents. Next is Cyclone Kick, finally making him a full-on Shoto adjacent character. This one's done with a quarter circle back and kick. The input for his Super Optic Blast has also been changed as well. It's now a quarter circle down motion in two punches. Quarter circle down isn't really a term used much, if at all, since the input is so rare. An easy way to remember it is to think of it as the first half of a half circle back motion. Cyclops' theme in this game is done by Yuko Takahara. I find this theme an interesting juxtaposition to his Children of the Atom theme, in that this one uses far more brass instruments, giving the composition an air of triumph fitting for the leader of the X-Men. Quick side note, but have you ever noticed that nearly every X-Men hero in the Versus games have at least one super that starts with them briefly striking an X pose? This even extends to Phoenix and X-23 in Marvel 3, though it's a little harder to spot there. It's a neat little visual flourish that I only kinda noticed in the past, but definitely didn't realize how many characters actually did it. Here are Cyclops' colors. And here are his exclusive colors in the Sega Saturn port of the game. And here's his ending. Cyclops' next appearance was in Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. I've always found him and Omega Red to be kind of odd ducks in this, since they're the only two Marvel characters here that didn't appear in Marvel Superheroes whatsoever. It's always been a running theory of mine that Cyclops was meant to be a stand-in for Iron Man, similar to how they'd eventually get clever and put War Machine in Marvel 1, but that's just my crackpot idea. Cyclops' theme here is another Yuko Takahara piece. This one's a lot more laid back compared to the more up-tempo songs from the previous two games. Interestingly, the melody in the middle of the song would be reused for another character in the following Versus game, Captain Commando in Marvel 1. Takahara also composed that theme too, so that makes sense. That said, Cyclops doesn't get anything meaningfully new here moveset-wise, though the inputs for two of his moves were changed. Rapid Punch is now done with a sonic boom motion by holding back, then pressing forward and punch. You can still mash punch for more hits though. Neckbreaker Drop is done with a similar sonic boom motion, only replacing punch with kick. Of particular note in Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter are some of the new lines Norm Spencer recorded for Cyclops, including the first appearance of perhaps Cyclops' most well-known voice clip. Cyclops' assistant in this game is Gene Splice. Here are Cyclops' colors. And here are his extra colors in the Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 ports of the game. Alright, can we talk about that black color scheme for a second? That's like legit my favorite color scheme in this game. It's like a Black Ops uniform or something. I personally like to pair it up with Blackheart's exclusive black color in this game as well, and just run an all-black everything team. It's great. And here is Cyclops' ending. The giant Akuma robot here is Z Akuma, a giant Akuma mecha who was a console-exclusive character added to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn ports of Cyberbots. The name is short for Zero Akuma, or more specifically Zero Goki. This is a Neon Genesis Evangelion pun. The name is pronounced the same as Zero Goki, more commonly known as EVA Unit 0. So, comic books. Cyclops being at the forefront of X-Men means that most great X-Men stories usually feature him in some way. Stuff like the Phoenix Saga, Fall of the Mutants, Extinction Agenda, Inferno, he's there for all of that. Earlier, I mentioned post-House of M as a significant period for him. Messiah Complex onwards represents a time when mutant kind was more or less being led by him, and features Cyclops at his absolute coolest, even doing things like establishing a Black Ops squad of mutants to take out the threats to the mutant kind that he otherwise couldn't publicly risk confronting himself. That said, all of that development was built from one very specific comic book run that more or less dictated his characterization from the mid-2000s onwards. This video's comic book recommendation is Joss Whedon and John Cassaday's run on Astonishing X-Men. This run is a direct continuation of Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, which launched in proximity to the original Fox X-Men movies. Cyclops leads a team of X-Men consisting of himself, Wolverine, Shadowcat, Beast, Emma Frost, and then thought dead but recently returned Colossus. Having started a relationship with Emma Frost following Morrison's X-Men run, she coaches him in telepathic therapy sessions, which seem to have done Cyclops a world of good. He's considerably less closed off and abrasive and far more confident in his abilities in this run. The first arc revolves around a cure for the X gene, and all of the caveats and moral quandaries that come with such a thing, leading to characters like Beast tussling with Wolverine over the former's consideration of possibly taking it himself. It's soon discovered, though, that the cure is actually being manufactured with the DNA of a then-thought long-dead mutant, Colossus, who in fact wasn't dead, but was being kept pretty close to it. The aforementioned bits about the Danger character earlier in the video also originated in this run, forming the book's second arc. I think this run specifically is where Cyclops makes the transition from hesitant but reliable leader to being one of the most badass mutants ever. There's a pretty popular bit in this run in particular where a Sentinel attacks the mansion in the middle of the night, and instead of regrouping to formulate a quick plan to stop them, Cyclops is just like, I want these things off my lawn, and completely dusts the Sentinel in one shot. It's so impressive, even Wolverine's like, yeah, I see why you're in charge, man. That's not even getting into the brilliance he displays when he gets kidnapped and taken prisoner at one point in the run. I'm not even going to spoil how that one plays out, but it's one of the best Cyclops moments of all time. The Cyclops was right era Scott Summers was more or less born in this run, and continued elevating from Messiah Complex onwards, and as a fan of the character, it was great seeing him be such a bona fide badass in this, especially since he was kinda being done dirty in the movies at the time. If your only experience with Cyclops is through the cartoons, movies, and video games, and you've always wondered, what do people see in this goober? I highly recommend reading this run to get a good understanding of why Cyclops has some of the fans he does today. It's only 24 issues long, and unlike a lot of other X-Men runs, it's pretty much more or less self-contained from crossover events. It's a fantastic read. Cyclops wasn't playable in Marvel 1, but did appear as an assist character in the game, doing the light variation of his optic blast for an assist attack. It's a decent assist. It's not fantastic, but it's not bad either. To guarantee selecting his assist, hold light punch, medium punch, light kick, and start as the assist select menu appears. Cyclops appears as a playable character in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and he receives few changes overall. He's not top tier, but he's definitely in the upper half of the list, thanks to being one of the more well-rounded characters on the roster. He's great on point, he has one of the best assists in the game, and he has good synergy with a lot of the cast. His only real weakness is not really having a way to open up characters solo, making him a risky anchor character. Because of mediums being rolled in the light buttons in Marvel 2, he loses the standing variation of Optic Blast, retaining only the crouched version for his light variation, and the upwards blast for the heavy variation.
Blast! Optic Blast! Optic Blast!
Mega Optic Blast has received a small buff in that it can now be used in the air. Super Optic Blast also has a slightly simpler input, now done with a quarter circle forward and 2 kicks. Cyclops' first assist is Optic Blast. This is more or less identical to his Marvel 1 assist.
Yes. Optic Blast! Come on!
His second assist is Gene Splice. This is his best assist, and the one most people recommend. It has invincibility, it comes out fast, and it hits multiple times, making it somewhat similar to Psylocke's anti-air assist. It's a great assist in particular for Iron Man, who can use this assist to easily set up his infinite. His final assist is Cyclone Kick.
Yes. Cyclone Kick! Come on!
Here are all of Cyclops' colors. Color 3 seems to be a shout out to Cable's color scheme. Like father like son, I suppose. Color 4 seems to be a lighter version of his console exclusive black color scheme from Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. And color 5 seems to be a brighter shade of his Saturn exclusive color from X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Cyclops is a pretty important character to me. He was the first character I ever played as in any of Capcom's Marvel fighters, and seeing how cool he was there is what made me a fan from childhood. He's one of the most memorable inclusions in the series by far. There's a lot of people out there that have never picked up a comic but have watched X-Men the Animated Series or played Marvel vs. Capcom that know him and his deal, and I think that says a lot. He tends to show up in most other X-Men related games, and was even a character in the Mutant Academy series of fighters. Unfortunately, he didn't make it to Marvel 3, and according to producer Ryota Nitsuma, this wasn't for lack of trying. When asked at an event if there were any Marvel characters Capcom inquired about that Marvel shot down, he said he wasn't allowed to directly say who, but reportedly did a hand motion tracing an invisible X on his chest and a line across his eyes. Considering what we know now that Marvel had a list of no-go characters Capcom were absolutely not allowed to touch, and they even had to fight for characters like Sentinel, it adds up. And that's a shame. I'm one of those people that thinks Ultimate Marvel 3 probably has the best overall representation of Capcom and Marvel in the series, and even I have to admit that it feels a little wrong not having Cyclops there. He is a Heroes and Heralds card for what little that's worth though. That's going to do it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.